In this episode, we are covering what to do when a woman says that the way you touch her isn't enjoyable during foreplay. I'm going to share with you 5 specific techniques to touch a woman's pussy and body that feel great for her, amplifies your connection, and increases the turn on for both of you. Welcome back to The Naked Connection. This is the show that supports driven men to reach sexual mastery and build deep connections. What's up, you guys? It's Kirsten, your soon-to-be licensed therapist, and this episode is inspired by a listener question. Thomas wrote in saying this: the woman I have been seeing has very little sexual experience. She tells me she does not like sex because it hurts her. I'm trying to understand why and the extent of her pain. I started kissing and touching her neck and shoulders, slowly started touching her breasts, then kissing them also. She was enjoying it, or so I thought. I waited a while before touching her anywhere below the breasts. When I did, she was very wet but complained that it hurt. I stopped because I did not want to cause her pain. Now I'm confused and afraid to go there again. For the record, I did not penetrate her in any way, and yet she says it was very painful. What now? So, Thomas, thank you for writing in this question and providing all of this information. I am so glad that you submitted this question because this is something that I think a lot of couples experience. If you're in a situation like this, you're probably thinking, what the heck? I haven't even penetrated you and this is painful. I don't understand. I think I'm doing all of the right things. I'm moving at a certain pace. I'm touching here, I'm touching there. What am I supposed to do? Where do I go from here? It can be a really hopeless feeling to receive this feedback and to not know where to go. So today we are going to flip that. I want to equip you with particular ways to engage and touch a woman during foreplay that can lead to pleasure, not unwanted pain. So you guys, let's get some. Let's start off by talking about the clit. You might think of the clit as this P-shaped structure that's at the top of a woman's labia. It's like right at the peak, the apex of all of this beautiful fun. And that is true. And also, that is only part of the clitoris. That's only really the external portion of her. So there's actually both external and internal components to the clitoris. I think it's really important to understand the extent of this body part so that we can learn all of the different ways and all of the different techniques for not only stimulating the peak of the clit, but all of this body part and really creating maximum arousal and pleasure. The clit has legs, and also there's these vestibular bulbs that wrap around the vagina. And these legs and these bulbs all contain erectile tissue that expand when sexually aroused. So yes, similarly to how you have a penis that has erectile tissue and it expands when you get aroused, a woman does as well. And you can think of the overall clitoris in what I like to consider an upside down wishbone. So it has that peak and then it arches out and around. And this body part, the clitoris, has literally more nerve endings by square inch than any other part of the human body. It is insanely sensitive. So we're going to take all of this into consideration. We're going to think about the entire aspect of a clitoris and a woman's sexual body parts when we think about how to implement some of these techniques we're going to get into and really how to bring maximum pleasure and minimum pain. The first technique is thinking to pocket it. So you want to think about cupping your hand around the full length of her labia. So not just going straight to stimulating her clitoris, but really beginning by adding stimulation and touch to her entire pussy. So you can just hold your hand there, like cupping her, like imagining that you're holding onto it. I'm like kind of making a little cupping shape with my hand. And you can pulse gently or lightly rub, maybe even grind, but very, very lightly. I honestly think in the beginning, if you just put your hand down there and cup her entire pussy and just hold it there lightly, maybe a little bit firmly, as you're kissing her, as you're looking into her eyes, just holding it there, that can start the experience of pleasure right away, and it isn't overwhelming. So you can move from just simply holding your hand there to adding in that gentle pulsing, that light rubbing or grinding, maybe a little bit of undulating with your hand in a wave-like motion. And this is great because it isn't directing the stimulation only onto the tip of the clit. And you can give attention to really all of her in this moment. So that's one way that you could start things off that might not be overwhelming, might not be painful, might not be too much pressure or sensation right away. The second technique is to really start with indirect touch. You don't need to treat the tip of her clitoris as this doorbell that you're just ringing over and over and over again. In fact, you want to start by providing indirect stimulation. And one way that you can do this is to actually layer some of the natural folds of her labia over that tip of her clit to massage it indirectly. So this way you're reducing any friction that might cause the clit to be overstimulated. Because if you go straight to placing your finger on rubbing her clit, even though there is that hood that's covering it, as she becomes more and more aroused, if she's already wet, if she's already feeling sexually aroused, that hood may be retracting, and then you have direct exposure to the tip of the clit. And in the beginning, that can feel really, really overwhelming. So by actually using all of her body, you can gently fold some of her labia over this tip and massaging that way and reducing that friction that could come directly from the tip of your finger. And you can even do this indirect touch near the entrance to her vagina. So very lightly with one finger, maybe circling or stroking near the entrance as though you're about to place your finger inside of her, but not. It's building that sensation, it's teasing her, and you will start to notice if she is getting more and more aroused, she'll love how close you are to being almost inside of her. So literally thinking with like one or maybe two fingers, lightly tracing around the entrance to her vagina to begin to increase that stimulation and that experience of what could come soon. The next technique is, I like to think of it as calling it the V shape, like a peace sign. So maybe we should actually rephrase this to the peace sign technique. So you want to think about massaging either side of her clit. And it can be really arousing to, again, tease her a little bit by not rubbing right on the tip of her clit and instead rubbing on both sides with either 2 or 4 fingers in the shape of a V. So you can think about if this is the top of the clit, if you have that right here, rubbing up and down along the sides. And again, you can use a couple of fingers here, maybe using even both hands where you're rubbing up and down along the sides. And this stimulates the legs of the clit indirectly, right? So the clit in that wishbone shape has those 2 legs that fold down and around. So using this peace sign shape, this V shape of gently rubbing on both sides with either 2 or 4 fingers, that's really going to stimulate not just the tip of her clit, but all of those legs as well. And this isn't placing heavy pressure directly onto her clit, which is really, really something that we want to refrain from doing until you really notice that her entire being is aroused, that she's becoming engorged, that even the color of her pussy is beginning to change into deeper colors of reds, maybe even purples. So the fourth technique here is to actually explore using your thumb. Depending on your position, using the thumb can be a really great way to explore and provide a different type of sensation and pressure. The beauty of a thumb is that it isn't going to create such a pokey feeling as some of your other fingers will, right? It has a larger surface area. It has a really oftentimes a flat pad. Like your finger pad of your thumb is pretty flat. And so that a larger surface area invites in rubbing and a lighter pressure without that kind of poking sensation that can come with an index finger or your middle finger. I love this technique because it's really using all parts of your body. It's not just thinking about how can we traditionally touch somebody. It's about how can I use different parts of myself as well to increase pleasure. And the fifth technique is really all about placing attention on the vestibular bulbs of your woman. So the vestibular bulbs are these round masses of erectile tissue that sit on both sides of the vaginal opening. So this really, I like to think of it as an upside down heart shape. So you have a heart, upside down heart shape, and the vestibular bulbs are on the bottom, on the left side and on the right side. And these bulbs are similar to your penis in that they start smaller and limp and will become massively engorged and swell. So again, that erectile tissue in these bulbs, it's growing and growing and growing the more and more she becomes aroused. And the more aroused that she becomes, the larger the bulbs become, and the more pleasure is welcomed. And I like to think of this as a triangle. So if you think of the clit as the top of the triangle, these bulbs are at the bottom two corners of this triangle. We're getting into geometry class. This is a equilateral triangle. All sides are equal. So on the bottom two corners is where your vestibular bulbs are. And what can be really fun to do here is to stimulate all three of these areas one at a time. So maybe starting with stimulating the bottom right bulb, moving over, stimulating the left bulb, and then coming up to the clit and kind of moving in a circle of these 3 points on her triangle. And when you think about stimulating her bulbs, you want to do this with a little bit of a firmer touch. So slowly stimulating them with firm touch. And then as you go to the peak of that triangle, going up to the clit and lightly stimulating the clit, and then going back down and more firmly stimulating the bulbs. I actually think that I'm going to do a full episode focusing specifically on the vestibular bulbs because I feel like this is a part of a woman's sexual anatomy that is often overlooked and actually can be some of the most powerful ways to turn her on. If you think about it, the vestibular bulbs are really at the base of all of this juicy pleasure. And if you can begin to get this aspect of herself aroused, it leads up and up and up into the peak of her clitoris. So the ultimate goal here is to have tissue all around the opening to her vagina to be so incredibly engorged that the tissue this might seem strange, but it actually begins to seem almost gelatinous. Like it's so wet, it's so lush, it's almost like a gelatinous touch. It's a weird thing to say, but here we are. So when doing all of these 5 techniques, I want to provide some really just blanket advice for all of this. First and foremost, go 10 times softer than you think to start. Whatever you think is soft, if you go to touch her and you think, this is soft, I challenge you, go even softer. One of the worst things that can happen during foreplay for a woman's clitoris is that it becomes overstimulated from firm and fast motion too quickly. And that can lead to her becoming numb. And this is challenging because there's almost no return once a woman's clit becomes numb in this specific sexual encounter. You'd have to take time for it to come down, to relax, to return to a normalcy, and then re-enter into that arousal state again. So go slower, truly. I believe going slow means going fast. Because if you start slow and light with her, it will speed up the process of her overall arousal. If you go hard right away, most times it's going to be overstimulating, overwhelming, and lead to numbness and pain. Soft, light, slow is fast, okay? And fast is slow in this situation. And then again, you want to think about stimulating her for a longer periods of time. Let's say stimulating her glands for 10 seconds isn't going to get them filled up like the Pillsbury Doughboy, okay? Slow and consistent buildup is key here. And as you begin to notice her turn on, you can play with firmer and faster stimulation. So it's like starting to slowly rev up that engine, starting slow, starting soft, and building firmer and faster stimulation as you go. And finally, I want to say this. Every single woman's pussy is different. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And also, yes, that means that what works for one woman isn't necessarily going to work for another. So this pulls in this need and this desire to check in with her, to read her, to practice being really aware of how what you're doing is impacting her. I think this can be really powerful when you begin to place your attention and your awareness on the power that you have in enticing pleasure within a woman. So the way that you touch her has the power to bring her into a new state of arousal and pleasure. And that is so, so incredible. So using that power that you have to really read her, to check in, to recognize, ooh, she really seemed to respond well to that. Oh, she seemed to get kind of quiet and non-responsive. Oh, I'm kind of noticing that things aren't getting wetter. They're maybe getting a little bit drier. Ooh, she's like really getting aroused. And don't be afraid to engage in dialogue with all of this. If she says that's too much, explore adjusting. Try something different. And I want to say this, if she's telling you, hey, I don't like that doesn't feel good. Ooh, let's like do something different. Like that's beautiful information. And I think that we're not always, but something to consider. If you are getting this feedback, instead of taking it as rejection, take it as, oh, she wants this to be a really great experience for both of us. And she's telling me how to adjust here. Let's feed into that. So I hope that this has been helpful. Thomas, I cannot wait to hear how it goes if you try any of these techniques and intentions out. I truly love hearing from you guys. If you have a question like Thomas that you want answered on the show, be sure to submit it at thenakedconnection.com/question. So please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below, and share what has worked for you with your girl. This is for all of you amazing men. I am always so honored to be here with you. This is Kirsten, and until next time, let's get some. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Naked Connection. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Trust me on this, your sex life and that special someone in your life will thank you for it. And if you really love the show, please take a moment and leave a 5-star review or a written review and let me know what you think. It would mean so much to me and this show. Until next time, happy connecting.